Welcome to the OLM Working Group meeting. Today is Thursday, March 25th. On the agenda today, we have several topics from Chris and Aiden, and then a topic from Evan on Ruckpack. So I guess this question is to Chris. Chris, do you want to kick us off with some of these topics, or do you want to let Evan kind of present this Ruckpack proposal to the group first?
Yeah, how much time do you need, Evan?
It's probably 10 minutes plus whatever time for conversation we want. So
yeah, I guess why don't you go first, because one of my parties isn't here yet, and so he said he's gonna be about 20 minutes late anyway. So since we deferred on you last time, you can go first.
Sure. Let me get my screen shared. I'll do that. All right, can we see that?
Yep.
Cool. Okay, so I just made a quick presentation over some of the, I guess, straw man proposal for future OLM APIs. Just pulling out this one piece to kind of deep dive into and give an overview of kind of what it's solving and where it's coming from and where we think it might be useful and why. So this is, tentatively called Ruckpack. It's mostly just a placeholder name, so we have something to call it, but I did check, and Ruckpack.io is available as a domain name, so that's always something to keep in mind. Yeah, I'll just get started. The things that I wanted to cover first is the making these new APIs unsurprising. And I think one of the strategies for that is to reuse patterns that are used elsewhere in Kubernetes. So I was going to briefly go over pod and image concepts, which I expect will be old news to everyone here, but just for completion's sake. And then also revisit the persistent volume claim, and storage class APIs, some of the things and choices that they make. And then briefly certificate signing requests, and then actually get into the Ruckpack proposal. So the first is pods and images. An image is a reference to an external runnable OCI image, and there's not an explicit API for it in Kubernetes. It's all handled implicitly by the kubelet. And a pod is an indication that you want that image to be run on a cluster. You want the content to be pulled down and actually running somewhere. The details of all of that are handled by the kubelet and the scheduler. The next one is the persistent volume ecosystem, which has 3 APIs: the persistent volume claim, and the storage class. So the pattern that's really interesting here is, I think, the storage class process and the what they call provisioners. So you define a persistent volume type, persistent volume and reference a type in the storage class name. And this references another object called storage class, each, which I think I'd have now. I'll skip up to storage class and go back to storage claim. So storage class has this ID, and that refers to a controller that's running elsewhere in the cluster, and it's a unique identifier for the controller that is the AWS, in this case, AWS EBS controller for provisioning any persistent volumes or persistent volume claims that reference a storage class that have this provisioner ID. So the provisioners are tied to storage classes, and then persistent volumes and persistent volume claims are tied to storage classes. And the provisioner controls all 3 of those APIs. And they even have, if you were to look at the kube API, this parameters block on storage class has no schema. It's completely defined by the provisioner that happens to read it. So each provisioner has its own set of things that it understands in these 3 APIs. And then the last thing that I wanted to touch on is the certificate signing request API in Kubernetes, because it has a feature that is pretty relevant to a lot of the things we talk about, which is approval. I'll skip the CA cert signing details, but you build a certificate signing request yourself, however you need to, and then you submit it to Kubernetes in the spec of a CSR object. And then there are other controllers that either approve or don't approve the CSR. So if you make a certain type of CSR in Kubernetes, it might fall under a policy where there's a controller that auto approves them, and it'll add the approved API, and then the CSR controller will go ahead and fulfill the CSR request and output the certs you want. If the CSR you make doesn't fall under the purview of one of those controllers that's already running, then you have to manually approve it, and there's a kubectl certificate approve API that you can use, and all it really does is add this approval condition for you. And that's it. And then it goes on again to the CSR controller, which creates the actual certs for you. So keep all those things in mind, because we're going to copy them heavily for the Roughpack APIs. The basic idea here is to more or less generalize the idea of a pod in an image. The thing that is generalized is that we no longer have artifacts that are runnable images. We have arbitrary artifacts. And the concept of a pod of saying like make this image run, we're going to generalize that to make the content of the artifact available on the cluster. Because we're dealing with artifacts, and we have ideas of what artifacts we want, but we'd also like to make it pluggable so we're not restricted to the things we have today. We'll copy the storage class provisioner idea from PVCs and persistent volumes. And we have, in OLM today, we have install plans that have approval modes that has one very specific way you could do approval, but it makes more sense, I think, for our needs to, again, make that more of a pluggable layer and say, you can write your own controllers, and we'll provide some by default, but we'll have a pluggable system for how approval works, like CSRs. So the first API is bundle. It is kind of the idea of an image in a cluster. There's no image API in Kubernetes by default, though there is in OpenShift. And like I said, it's the idea that the content should be made available somewhere else. And then we'll also tack on that the bundle can also reference local content. We have enough workflows where it's useful to be able to reference other things within the cluster and expose them in the same interface as remote content, that we want to take a look at that as well. So here's just a quick strawman example of what a bundle API could look like. Has a name, has a class, which is, again, the idea of referencing a storage class concept, and have a controller that knows about this type of bundle and knows how to unpack it and apply it to a cluster. So for operator bundles, we might start with a provisioner that knows how to unpack bundles that have CSVs in them, which are the registry v1 bundles we have in OLM today. But you could easily see extending that to other types of artifacts as well. And then the ref of the actual objects we want to pull down, and then the status of whether or not that content has been made available. And this is, again, I think, going to be defined by the provisioner, what it means to make the content available. In this case, it'll list out all the objects that were unpacked. For our purposes, we want this to not be actually applying them to the cluster. We want that to be just available. So I can read the contents of a role, but that doesn't mean that the role has been created on the cluster, because that's the responsibility of the next API. And then there's a quick example of what it might look like to do this with local content, where we just mount in the data that we want to read. So the next API is the instance API, which is kind of the idea of a pod, but for an arbitrary artifact. And it indicates that the bundle should be somehow active, but again, that'll be sort of provisioner specific. And the provisioner uses the instance configuration, not just to make a bundle install, but also to pivot between two versions of a bundle if needed. So you might draw an analogy to a deployment or something like that. So example of the instance API here, this is the selector that lets us select between old and new versions of a bundle. And then, a reference to a bundle object is all we need. to make it active, but potentially we optionally let you put the whole spec of the bundle in. So then it would be a single apply operation to both put a bundle on a cluster and activate it if that was needed for the workflow you're using. And then all of this functionality will be provided by provisioners that they read and write the bundle and instance API. Similar to storage class, we'll have an API that's provisioner class, and it manages that cluster unique identity for each provisioner, and it has provisioner specific configuration that you can use to determine how bundles get applied to the cluster. Here's just I don't even know if this is a useful example because there's nothing here, but you can imagine that there are parameters for your provisioner that decide how to apply a bundle. Maybe it settings for how you might translate a CSV into manifests, for example, if we started with registry v1 bundles. And then I have a couple slides here. They're kind of dense, but it's things around. We need to think about the permission model here and how people will actually use them. So we might want to have some custom verbs on provisioner classes to prevent you from installing content that you shouldn't be able to. Webhooks to protect different aspects of these APIs. Webhooks to prevent someone from approving something that they shouldn't be able to. Resetting approval when the content changes, things like that. But those are more details that I think are easier to hash out in a longer document. That's kind of it for Ruckpack. It's kind of the base layer, fairly basic ideas, nothing too crazy. But I think hopefully it's clear how we could build on top of this layer to get a lot of what we do in OLM, but in a more decomposed fashion, so that this is something that is useful on its own and testable on its own. You can use separately from OLM, but would also be a foundation for some of the other things that we're talking about doing for OLM.
You have good examples of things that are not containers or pods that would be deployed through bundles? References to external services or what?
The canonical, well, there's two examples that we have in mind. One is literally an operator bundle. So it's a container image that just has other kube manifests that should get applied to the cluster. So that's where if we had the Ruckpack APIs today, we could swap out that component of OLM, and we currently track bundle unpacking in a relatively complex API in the install plan. We could delegate all of that to the Ruckpack APIs. The other place, I was kind of trying to avoid going into this, but you could, if you go layer up, one of the things that OLM does is it resolves dependencies and comes up with a set of content to be applied. And that representation of the set of things that should be installed together could also be another bundle. And then the provisioner that knows about those types of bundles would be one that knows how to create other bundles. So maybe that's a meta approach to this API. I think you could also, there's other interesting ecosystem things, right? This lets us take things that look like operators from other ecosystems and potentially shim them in just with the provisioner implementation. So we could do things like operators that are currently deployed with Helm charts, or things that are cross-plane packages or things like that. Things that have a lot of the properties of operators that we kind of be interested in managing today requires like a transformation of the packaging. With this approach, we wouldn't have to transform the packaging. We'd just provide a provisioner that understands the native packaging.
Okay, thank you. Good examples.
Yeah, I think last week as well, when I was talking about ODLM, the operand and deployment lifecycle manager, you were thinking if this could be another packaging mechanism which we could write a provisioner for, which would extend that model, which you could envision we would have registries or operand configs kind of in that, where you could have operand graphs. So yeah, I can think of a lot of use cases for this.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. And the thing that we didn't go into in this presentation, but the thing that's exciting to me about this is that this can all feed into small representations in the declarative index config that we've been talking about. So it would be possible to build a catalog that has both operator definitions and operand definitions. And you can go to the catalog and either say like, I want to pick this nice pre-configured set of operands, or I don't care about that, I'll just install the operators. But the resolver can figure out the stuff you need in both cases.
Cool. Thanks, Evan. Really exciting stuff. So if it doesn't seem like anyone has any more questions on Ruck back, I think we'll definitely talk about that more in the future. So next on the agenda, we have several topics from Chris. Chris, do you want to kick us off with one of these? I'm not sure which one you want to.
Yeah, I can. Yeah, I'll start from the top down, and I'll probably skip the second one until Aiden shows up. So the first one's really an operator SDK issue by Joe's. I think Joe Lanford was on. He might be able to answer this. So I've been building up, and this goes into the next one. So I've been playing with the Ansible operator with operator SDK 1.3.2. And I've been trying to get it back to kind of where it was a while ago, where everything is namespace scoped and not all namespaces scoped. And I'm trying to get my security domain really fine grained. So the simple question I had is there a right way to override the service account so it's not using default?
Yes, there is. If you look at how, so a change actually just went into KubeBuilder that made it in, I think it made it into SDK 1.5. And for now, it's only for Go operators. But I think the exact same thing applies. Like it's going to be a one-to-one because it's all just dealing with the RBAC.
Okay.
That changes it to not use the default service account. So I'll go in the background here, I'll go and try to find the PRs that change that, and I'll link them to you.
For the master is merged now for Ansible and Helm as well. It's
okay,
aligned.
Perfect. Camilla, could you link that to Chris?
Sure.
And if you could just put it in the agenda, that'd be awesome. Otherwise, in the chat, I can do either way.
No problem at all. Yeah,
awesome.
can be.
Yeah, so I'm just getting familiarized with Kustomize myself, and so I'm trying to figure out where the right balance is of where do you. So I'm basically created my own little scripting around, because I'm basically what I'm doing is I'm building a prototype of what a multi-tenant set of operators would look like for our customers, because our customers really want multi-tenancy, and so I'm trying to come up with a model. Just to prototype how that would look when you have, when you have the operator groups set up the right way so they don't intersect in the wrong ways and all that kind of stuff, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. But so yeah, I was just trying to figure out where is the right spots, where are the extension points for the operator SDK to basically be able to augment things. Like for example, when I wanted to change from creating cluster permissions to normal permissions in the CSV, all I had to do was basically change the type inside the cluster role and cluster role binding object, or the role and role binding object. And then the operator SDK was smart enough to detect that and then convert those to the right sections inside the CSV. It doesn't do that for the default service account. Which is, I think, what you guys are going to talk about here. So I guess I'm wondering, what is it the right way to modify and augment the customize data, or should I be adding a customized layer on top of customize? If you know what I mean. Where do I do the templating to do that? Or is it designed, because I've got products, for example, who want to put the operator SDK inside the pipeline and generate all this stuff and augment it all the time, rather than generating it on a developer's workstation and checking in the code and then augmenting it there. They want to try to use operator SDK to continually regenerate the pieces that make sense, which doesn't make sense to me because I think it's more of a developer tool than a pipeline tool.
But what do you mean with what kind of pieces do you mean? Create APIs, create,
I think he's talking about creating bundles or generating CSV.
Bundles is certainly Yeah, that's the number one thing. Absolutely.
So, so if you run making bundle, if you use everything, if you generate the APIs using the tool, has a customized file where we updated and put all APIs that are created. And then when you run make a bundle, this customized file is used. So if you are doing things like manually, you could try to respect that. And then when you run making bundle, the SDK, you know where is the data, do you know? And you'll be able to generate the things right for you. I think that should be the way that I would try to do that.
So one question that I have, so when you're trying to regenerate a bundle, do you have access to the entire project's source code, or do you just have access to like a set of manifests that have already been generated?
Good question. I think it depends. We've got lots of different teams doing this, and they're kind of all discovering their own ways. And we're trying to provide guidance so everybody's new people starting out do it the right, the same way. What would you recommend is the right way, is the right approach to that?
So if you're trying to use different service accounts and hook those up to the so you configure an entire bundle with different service accounts. In that case, I would recommend using Customize on a project, because you don't need to have multiple layers of Customize here. You basically run Customize builds config/manifests, and you have Customize, which will actually replace the relevant locations with the service account name if it detects the service account within the set of manifests that it's building. And that kind of allows you to have like multiple directories, each with their like a different service account that will direct Customize build to actually replace the service account name differently across different bundles. So you can do it that way. In general, it's probably best to have like the entire repo checked out in your pipelines. One thing you can do though, and the bundle generator will support, or it does support this mode, is pre-generate, like run Customize build and check that output in one big file into source code. And so now you have the entire like production ready set of manifests already generated. And then you can actually pass that into operator SDK, generate bundle. You don't need to have a project present. You just have to have that set of manifests checked in. And on the fly, you could kind of do what you're saying and write like another customization.yaml file that takes those resources and applies another service count on top of those, and you can reconfigure that set of manifests and do a whole bunch of things with that. So there's really two modes in my mind. One is like you have a naive project with a bunch of like unconfigured manifests, and then you have this like pre-production set of manifests that you can then modify on the fly within a pipeline. So I think it really depends on what access your pipeline has to the source repository.
Yeah, I think I get it.
Okay.
I will put in there as well one document that we did that explain all directors of the project as well. Maybe this help you know where is everything, do you know, for you are able to do your customizations.
So I actually have a question for you, Chris. So the way I understand kind of what Eric was describing and how I understand the whole generation process is it's kind of 3 steps. The first step is like you run Customize and you get a bunch of manifests out. And the second step is you pipe that into a CSV generator and you get like all the manifests plus the CSV And then the third step is you pipe all of that into the thing that generates the bundle for you. So I think, and this is where maybe Eric can correct me where I'm wrong, but you should be able to plug your pipeline in any of those steps, as long as you can have like the upstream components, or, you know, as long as there's like an interface for how people provide operators to your pipeline. So if any of those like entry points into your pipeline is something that can be provided to you, then I think you're in a good spot.
Yeah, I think that was,
so,
yep. By looking at the make file, you know, that was pretty obvious that those are the 3 steps. So that was awesome. The thing that's really confusing to me is I just don't understand the magic that spits out the CSV file, that populates the CSV file. There seems to be a lot of hardwired information inside the operator SDK plugin or something that has some of those rules in there. And so it's not clear what the extension points are.
So is
Yeah,
your problem?
so-
Sorry.
I was just, so it is pretty complicated. Eric is probably the expert on this, but the long and short of it is basically SDK will look at all of the role bindings and cluster role bindings and roles and cluster roles and service accounts, and then also the name of the service account on the deployment. And based on all of that information, it knows, okay, if the service account name on the deployment is foo, and I see a service account foo, and I see a bunch of roles, role bindings for foo, then all of those things go into the CSV under permissions or cluster permissions. But if I see other service accounts or other role bindings, then those things will go into just separate RBAC files in the bundle. Eric, did I get that pretty much right?
Yep, that's correct.
Okay, yeah, that's what I figured.
I
I figured it was being inferred by information that was someplace. It just wasn't clear exactly where it was being inferred from. So for example, the role binding has a service account also in there. I think it's got default, and then the namespace is system. And then so I wasn't sure, and I didn't try changing the deployment, but I tried changing that, and it didn't change anything else. So I was wrong. So
Chris, I feel like we're getting really deep into SDK territory.
yeah, you're right.
This is the OLM working group, so hopefully your question was addressed. If not, SDK has their own, upstream community. Maybe we can move on to something more OLM.
Nope, that's fine.
Great.
All right, maybe so Aiden isn't here yet, so I'm going to skip that one for the time being. So the next one.
I did actually join, Chris.
Oh, yeah, okay. Let's jump onto that one then. So Aiden works for IBM with me, and he works on one of the components and one of the products. And so jointly we've kind of figured out how OLM kind of has this life cycle. When you start a subscription, how the SAT solver gets involved, and it figures out if the upgrade graph is capable or not, and it generates. There's a job that extracts bundles from when the catalog server or the catalog pods try to figure out what upgrade graphs there are. Then install plans are generated. Kind of figured that part out. So number one, do you guys have a picture that actually shows the right flow of those things? What the status of those things are at each of those stages, and then how do you fix things when things don't? I've asked this many times, but I'm asking them more coherently now since I understand it better. At what point can you restart parts of those flows? So for example, one of the problems that Aiden was having is he had an install plan that had a problem. It couldn't complete for whatever reason, so it was failed. So I think he fixed the problem, but then how does he restart the install plan? How does OLM know that it can restart that again? Or do we have to basically restart the whole subscription process from the beginning again, delete it and recreate it?
I guess I can speak to this a little bit, and Evan probably helping me out. I think in the past, which I don't remember when that was, probably a long time ago, the install plan was able to re-trigger and restart itself. But that is not the case anymore. That the install plan is just a job, and when the job fails, it just basically stay there in the failed state forever. So even if you go into and correcting, whatever the underlying issue may be, in the install plan will just gonna be idle there because it's essentially done its job. That is attempt to install stuff, and for some reason it didn't work, and then it's just gonna stay there. In order for you to move forward, you essentially have to manually re-trigger the install plan by changing certain status to enable it to basically reinstall again.
How do you kickstart so do you delete the install plan and then it'll just
No,
recreate?
you basically changing the status of the install plan into installing. And then OM will basically attempt to basically processing the install plan.
That's kind of like in the event that something goes wrong. I don't know that that's like a workflow we want folks to like be doing, right? That's sort of like an implementation detail of that's the fact that that's how the install plan state machine works right now, right? So I mean, you can do this. It's a little bit of a hack. And like, I think what's important to recognize is that like at a high level, an install plan is sort of, it exists as sort of an executor and log of stuff that OLM did at a particular point in time. And so like in most cases, if you're not sure of exactly what's going on under the hood with OLM, the only really safe thing to do is do a reinstall, right? Because if the install plan is in a failed state because it failed to do something, right? That's essentially the manual intervention scenario, right? You can't really re-trigger an install plan depending on what state it's in if it's failed. So I think Vu, you're correct in saying that like you can do this thing. I would be concerned about like going and telling customers, for example, to ever do that.
Yeah, I have mentioned absolutely that this is a manual step, meaning this is a workaround. Anything that you have to manually do anything is not a supported type of thing because OM supposed to be, automatically do things for you. If you have to manually intervene on something, that is just a workaround to unblock, a certain specific cases. It's not supposed to be something that you're advertising or recommend user to do. Because as Kevin just said it, the only way to basically officially get out of this is to reinstall the operator, essentially.
So when you say reinstall the operator, I'm assuming you mean delete the subscription, recreate the subscription?
Correct. You need to literally delete everything. You need to delete the subscription and the CSV to basically uninstall the operator and restart the process again.
Yeah, so there's no shortcut in there. So you can't just delete the CSV. You can't change some status in the subscription and have it kind of restart from wherever, try to reconcile from where it left off.
Yeah, no, because the situation happening here is that you basically already in the upgrading process that you're having essentially most likely two CSV operator already been installed, most likely the existing version and the new version that being installed, and it failed halfway through because you failed to installing, I don't know, cluster row, for example, in this case, just an example here. Then you basically stuck in the fail scenario already. That means that you cannot deleting the new CSV because the upgrade is already happening. You need to basically refresh the whole thing by redo everything. We don't have the rollback feature, unfortunately, at this point.
All right. So Aiden, did they answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. And we were basically going down the same road of, there might be some, way that we could manually recover, but, as far as what we would document for a customer, I think we were going to go the route of recommending they reinstall the operator. So, and I think that supports this discussion. So, or vice versa. So, we'll go with that for now.
One more thing, I can't find it, but I'm pretty sure there's either a story or a bug somewhere for install plans to be non-terminal and for them to be level triggered. Does anybody here from OLM side remember if that was actually a story or a bug?
We had a bug, but that's slightly different of what you said about recreate install plan. That's a little bit different. But the story, I thought we talked about this, but we never create the story.
Yeah, I don't know that, like, I don't know that that's necessarily what we, well, let me put it a different way. I don't believe that anyone has written a design that describes install plan becoming a writable interface in a way that sort of gels with a lot of the stuff we're also talking about doing.
Well, I wasn't saying a writable interface, I was saying non-terminal.
That
Essentially, Nick says,
yeah, I understand the distinction. I'm just saying, I don't know that from a practical like implementation perspective, if there's necessarily that much of a difference between those two things. I guess,
yeah,
like, I mean, you could imagine a world where what you're describing is possible, but there's a lot of edge cases, right? In the case where we've already started to apply some stuff and you need to roll some of it back.
okay, maybe we're talking past each other or at different things. I'm gonna take a look through the Jira a little bit harder because it doesn't sound like what I was saying is what you're saying, but it could just
Nick,
be me misinterpreting.
Yeah, maybe.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, Nick. I think Dan was the one posted the Jira he posted on chat is actually what you may actually mean, Nick.
Yeah, that's it. That's exactly the one I was looking for.
Yeah, this is, sorry, my computer has decided to grind to a halt. I was trying to look this issue up, but I am pretty sure that Ben, who's currently assigned to it, is supposed to be taking a look at implementing it starting next week. So it might not be too long before this lands.
Yeah, and I think, you know, the failure that we were running into was driven by a delay in leader election on our controller. So, you know, it was basically something that like very easily could have been, you know, just a simple retry 10 minutes later and it would have passed. You know, so I think some very basic retry logic would be probably enough to get past at least what we saw.
Yeah, Aiden, I'm able to see that Jira ticket, and so it looks like that would cover that.
Yep, I was just pulling it up on my side as well.
So that's cool. All right, so I think we've covered that one. Do you mind if we go on to the next one?
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
Actually, I'm gonna go to the last one first because that one's the quick one. So two features were being worked on in the OpenShift 4.8 timeframe with the you know the declarative index feature and what was the other one they had on there? Oh yeah, and then there was we talked about this before where the deprecation of a bundle or a channel was kind of halfway done and then it was abandoned or put on the shelf for a while because there were some problems with it, and then it was. I saw Daniel Messer said it was it was scheduled for 4.8, but it was yellow. So I was just wondering what the status of those two are. Are they still kind of in plan for 4.8? We're just kind of thinking ahead for the kinds of things we're looking to do.
Can you guys hear me?
Okay, now.
Yes, Nick.
Okay, so I can give an update about the declarative config. So right now, I'm not sure if it has been marked as yellow, but I think that is effectively yellow for 4.8 at this point of time. There is one story which is serving with declarative config that will probably make in, but we will probably not be able to get in the entire thing for 4.8.
Can I just, I think this is fine. I just want to point out this is the upstream call, so I don't know if we want to talk about specific timeframes or specific like release plans about downstream stuff, making it into a particular OpenShift release, if we can avoid that.
Well, I'm interested. Well, they're tied together, right? I mean, when is the code going to be integrated into master so I can see it there? We could say it that way too.
Yeah, that's totally reasonable. I don't think there's anything wrong with us talking about like where those particular features are in the development cycle. I'm just saying like specifically talking about like whether that's going to make a specific OpenShift release. That's kind of like a separate thing, and there are like I think a lot of external factors aside from whether or not code gets merged into upstream that affect some of that stuff. My point is I don't want to make any like specific references or promises to anything like that in a way.
Yeah, I'm not looking for any, I'm not going to
Yeah.
put anybody's, yeah, I'm looking for just a general idea, because then I will certainly go through the OpenShift channels to get more specific ideas. I just wanted a general idea, because if you guys basically say, yeah, it's really not looking good, then it's not going to probably look any better from the other angle, right? So
what I'll say is we are on the operator registry, so I'll put that in the agenda that implements a lot of the basics for like how to read and write declarative configs and then how to serve specs. So as soon as that gets used and everyone is happy with it, that'll merge into register.
hey, Joe, I'm sorry, but you're somehow have a horrible echo. So we couldn't hear anything you just said.
It's breaking up.
All right, is this better?
Yeah.
Yes, it is. Thank you.
All right. So there's a PR up in operator registry for a whole bunch of the implementation for declarative config from the perspective of reading and writing the actual like directory structure, and then also serving that directory structure via the existing index registry gRPC API. So as soon as that gets reviews and there's consensus on that direction, that'll get merged, like we'll merge that into master and that'll be the first thing. And then Anik has, and Vu and I kind of have some follow-on PRs that'll go in after that. So it's kind of all dependent on that initial PR getting merged. But most of the implementation is done. We're down to the, let's review it and see if there's any fine tuning we want to make. I'll post that, and then there's also an enhancement proposal that we've been updating, and I'll post that in the agenda as well.
Yeah, I've been watching the enhancement proposal. That's one thing I've been watching. I haven't looked at any the code, so that's been real helpful. There's been a lot of back and forth on that, so I've been not watching it super close. But what about the deprecation feature? Is that something that you guys are still looking at?
So I think the short answer is there is no enhancement proposal currently written for any of that stuff. The longer form is, I guess my question would be, is there a specific part of that or work that you're looking for that needs to get done? Like, I guess the thing that I think is sort of misleading about that effort maybe is that it's not really a, we already have channel deprecation. Or channel removal, right? Like you can publish catalogs that don't include a channel anymore. It's just a matter of like finagling the set of bundles the right way. The thing that is targeting is more around like some OpenShift specific features around basically like bubbling status up to users based on like whether or not you're using something that's going to go away in the future.
Yeah, I think one of the problems we're running into is that we're starting to get, we have some products that are using continuous integration, right? So they come out with a lot of patches, right? And so the channels are starting to get pretty big. And so, and we're using replaces. We're not using the semver skip patch stuff because it doesn't work with our channel taxonomy. And so, we have to have the replaces in there for every one of those patches. So it's hard to remove anything from that channel tree because all of a sudden, if you need to rebuild the channel, there's a replaces missing. So we're going to have to adjust. We'd have to rebuild bundles to take the replaces out so the new origin of the channel changes. So I was hoping the deprecation logic would help fix that.
Yeah, I don't know that it will, because I think what you're actually looking for is like being able to make actual structural changes to the catalogs in ways that like the bundles.
Yeah, declarative
provide
index
right
will
there.
fix that, right?
Right. Yeah, that's what
Yeah.
I was gonna say.
Yep. Okay. All right. That's fine. Okay. Did anybody else want to tackle any more on that, or before we move on to the last topic? All right. If you don't mind, let's go to this last one. So last week, at the earlier call, it was I think it's the future planning call. I brought up how we at IBM are trying to leverage multi-tenancy as much as we can, right? And so we are using single namespace or own namespace scope for operators, and we had invented a couple of other operators to handle the permissions and the namespace scope operator, and then ODLM for operands. And ODLM also handles on-demand operator installations and things like that. So I finally started really looking at operator groups much more seriously to figure out how they actually work. And so there's a big old warning in the OpenShift documentation that says don't use the multi-namespace version of operator groups because that will probably be going away. And of course I've read the descoping documentation, so I understand the whole problem that you can't fix all the multi-tenancy issues. So I've kind of embraced that. I understand what the problems are. So assuming that we never ever break APIs. So we have a policy, for example, that would say, hey, if you're going to break APIs and we have support multi-tenant clusters, then all of those things that are shared, webhooks, APIs, those can't ever break, period. If you need to break them, introduce a new API, right? So if we had something like that, are there any other problems with the multi-namespace operator groups that I need to be aware of? Or are they just really, really bad to use and you're just telling me to run away from them?
I could speak to the multi-tenancy concerns a bit. I think that in general, the reason that warning is there in the documentation is because Kubernetes itself doesn't really provide the strong enough primitives to do things with operators in a sort of multi-namespace way that will ensure that things are isolated enough from one another. And you know this already. But from OLM's point of view, like Evan provided the presentation where he talked about some of the future APIs, but it's worth noting that the idea is that the bundle and the instance and those are cluster scope resources. So just speaking to it a bit, like in terms of the future, are you looking for support right now with those?
Well, yeah. So I think so. Our customers have said very clearly, we're buying OpenShift, and we're buying it for multi-tenancy.
Right.
Right. And we're going to use namespace to do multi-tenancy, and we want you to use operators for multi-tenancy the same way. And so we need to make that work.
Right.
It doesn't fit awesome, but OLM has done a heck of a lot of work to make that actually not bad, right? It works mostly as long as you follow these basic rules. So I guess what I'm asking is this going to be supported?
I don't think we're gonna keep multi namespace or other operator groups like that. We're currently in the throes of trying to like design what scoping means for operators, as you've seen from the descoping doc. The one thing that's clear is that having a set of permissions for both the operator and user to share and copy out the way operators groups does is not, doesn't cover all of the use cases. And it also lets you run into a bunch of problems with dependencies, right? So beyond, firstly, we're trying to like figure out what this looks like in the new world with newer APIs. And to your question before about as long as you make sure that the APIs don't break, being the one thing that you have to commit to. I think there are also other problems where if you go to install, if your plan is to use multi-namespace to split up a cluster and install two of the same operator to watch either one of those sets of namespaces, OLM doesn't understand how to do things like webhooks for them. Sorry, maybe not webhooks. What I'm talking about is admission webhooks for CRDs. And upgrade those separately, like the upgrades aren't aware of each other.
Well, yeah, so our webhooks would have to be compatible, right? And the webhooks themselves would have to have some kind of versioning to make
Well,
sure we
I
didn't
mean,
downgrade it, you mean?
We don't, I'm using the wrong term. What is the thing for CRD conversion webhooks? And also like API services and different things like that, right? Those are things that require a service. And it requires the cluster to know where to route requests to. And for API services and conversion webhooks, the namespace can't be, there can't be more than one namespace for that thing, right?
Oh, I see what you're saying. So if you've got two instances of an operator running, only one of those guys can have an active webhook that's going to serve that CRD conversion webhook.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so which one's it going to be?
Yep. And we don't make any decisions or know about that today. And I don't think we're planning to build into multi-namespace operator groups anymore because of our stance that tenancy is something that the platform should handle. But that's not to say we're not going to try to handle the scoping problem separately.
Yeah, I mean, I saw, so I think it was Evan maybe put something in the descoped operator document talking about how, you know, patterns for designing the pods for the controllers, you know, whether you have just multiple instances of the pod in the controller namespace, or you have, it projects them actually into other namespaces, but you still have one source of truth for the CRD ownership and the webhook ownership. Yeah, I think those are probably good ways to iterate on that. And it would be really great if we could build that in, because that's, at least you get some element of tenancy off of that.
Yeah.
Are the operators that you're talking about running in multi-namespace mode, are those also operators that you're writing?
Yes. Well, right now I don't think we have any workloads that are doing this today. Every workload is either running an all namespace mode or own namespace mode, because that's what the UI supports for OpenShift. And so, you know, we're running into all sorts of problems because not everybody did it the same way, so they don't play well together, of course. But now, yeah, now we're going to start running into the problem that you install two operators in own namespace mode, and number one, you've got the security problem, the security domain problem, and then number two, you still have the same problem with webhook ownership.
Yeah, those problems. The issue is we can't make those problems go away because they're fundamental to Kubernetes right now, at least.
Yep. No, I get that.
So, I mean, I guess my recommendation would be to try out some of those patterns. My feeling in general is that anything that you would want multi-namespace mode for today is probably better solved with a pattern within the operator. And it would be super cool if we had identified that a couple years ago and had a bunch of great libraries to build that out with SDK or something. But we don't have that. But I still feel like those patterns will serve you better long run. At least then you'll be sort of the master of your own fate with those operators. Whereas we know that we have a tentative plan, at least, to deprecate operator groups, which would, I think, leave you stranded.
Yeah, okay. I mean, you said this before, to me, but I've never really understood it well until I actually started playing with it, right? And so now I've played with it, and I got a little confused because I saw in the UI there's all this support for multi-namespace operator groups that I hadn't seen before because I didn't turn it on. You have to install your operators, manually through the API, but then once they're there, then the UI actually does a little bit of wiring and help for you, right, to show you the namespaces that are bound together in the operator group and stuff. So that's what confused me. I said, oh, it's actually first class support here, or mostly first class.
Yeah, I mean, the insidious thing here is that multi-namespace operator groups work as they were designed to work.
Yeah.
And they work up to a particular degree. The problem is that since that point in time,
yeah,
things like conversion webhooks have appeared, and there's no way around that problem because that happens at a layer below us. So we just don't see a great way forward without either platform support or patterns like we're talking about for operators.
Yeah, I'm with. Okay, I appreciate that. That's good. I think it's just my own journey of acceptance of what to do with that. Yeah, so I think we're gonna have to figure out how to be clever within this confines of reality, and then figure out how we can help with the design of, I guess you're going to talk about Depster at some point here, things like that, and how we can, the descoping patterns and stuff, maybe we can start working on, these use cases around that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think from my end, I'm generally also sympathetic to the multi-namespace, multi-tenant view, but it's just sort of untenable. But there's definitely a lot of big customers and big companies that want, large multi-tenant clusters. But it just seems like with the current state of the world, it's best to go in the direction we're going in. So I understand that kind of, Chris, you're having the same realization that I had, maybe 6 months ago or so. So, okay, with that, it looks like we're out of time for today, actually. It's already 4 o'clock.
I just wanted to say one last thing on this topic. Chris, I noticed, like, from what I understand, a lot of customers are more concerned with the permissions that they're initially giving operators as is the reason that they want, like, tenancy. Like, they don't want to give an operator permission to do everything across all namespaces if it only needs it in the first few. Or
they want operators to control only its own namespaces. They don't want it peeking into their own. They don't want it to be like the deployment controller.
Yeah, but there's like some intermediate where they only want it to be able to access where they've granted it.
Exactly.
Right. Like, so use it in this namespace for this user or whatever. I think we've been talking about some stuff for templatizing what permissions an operator requires for to work for a given user, and putting that into the operator author's hands so they can define that in their bundle, and that can be sort of instantiated on the cluster whenever an admin wants to add a new user, so that like it's not up to OLM to like guess what they need or like do the same thing for every operator like operator groups do today. So I just wanted to like leave that as something we've been thinking about. Maybe we could throw up the straw man next time. Okay. Thank
Awesome. Yep. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you next week, feature planning at 10 a.m. Eastern. Bye.
Thanks, guys.